welcome to the new season of Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We've all met a boundary predator at some point in our lives. Maybe it's a boss who assigns you more work than your colleagues or insists that you have to work on a weekend that you already have family obligations for. It could be your 3-year-old who insists, Daddy said I could have another cookie. Or it could be a well-meaning family member who gives you unsolicited advice on topics you'd rather not discuss with them. Boundary predators rely on your passivity to get what they want. It's up to you to push back by understanding how to set healthy boundaries and maintain them. Now, unlike the law, personal boundaries don't exist on their own. You have to will them into existence by having sometimes difficult conversations. But if managed well, boundaries aren't meant to be walls between people. They are guideposts to help you give and receive love and care in a way that is good and feels healthy. Here to help us navigate the sometimes tricky landscape of boundary setting are two fantastic guests joining us on the show today. First, I'd like to introduce Sari Gilman, a psychotherapist, author, and workshop presenter on boundaries, self-care, and overwhelm recovery. Her TED Talk on boundary setting has received more than 1 million views, and she's also the author of several books and an online course on the subject. Her humanitarian work includes founding 2 nonprofits, serving homeless people and teens, and teaching community leadership. Welcome to the show, Sari. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's great to be here this morning.
Next, I'm so pleased to welcome Susan Wenzel. Susan is a certified sex therapist, relationship expert, and psychotherapist with over 10 years of experience working with individuals and couples, as well as leading seminars throughout North America. She is the author of A Happy Life in an Open Relationship, a guide to a healthy and fulfilling non-monogamous love life. Thank you so much for joining us, Susan.
Thank you for having me, Barbara. It's lovely.
I want to start by asking you both about the thing that everyone fears when it comes to standing up for themselves. How do you navigate the fallout? How do you deal with the anger and disappointment that might ensue? And, what if your relationship gets impacted in a negative way? Can setting a boundary ever break trust? Maybe let's start with you, Susan.
Okay, before maybe even I can answer your question, I want we start this topic with a little like a framework of what boundaries really is. So I like saying that boundary is like a beautiful flower garden. It's like a vegetable flower garden that is located near a forest or where wildlife can come and eat your vegetables. So we can't blame the wildlife for eating our vegetables or animals for eating vegetable or destroying our flower garden, and because it's our job to put the bond around it. So boundaries is that's what I see boundaries as is I'm setting boundaries because I know people would want to take their people would want to have their way, people want what they want, and it's our job to put those boundaries to keep everybody safe. So guard your flower garden. That's what we're trying to do today. That's the conversation today.
It's interesting your analogy about a flower garden and fencing it off from the animals who want to eat the flowers. Do you think that as humans that we're naturally wired to maybe take advantage or take too much if there aren't limitations put in place?
Yeah, I think that even looking at little children or even anybody is it's natural tendency to be selfish, it's natural tendency to what we want until we are socialized, until we learn better, until we understand better. And that's why boundary comes in. I love approaching boundary in that way because I don't feel resentful of people. I just know if only I communicate better, if only I can put my boundaries better, then people can know how to live with me, or people can know how to work with me, and I can know how to work with them. But if I see that as if people are don't want to set boundary, or if I see people that they're mean, they're whatever, I just see them as it's a natural tendency to want to get more than I can give to you, and it's my job to set those boundaries.
Now, Sarah, you had an interesting analogy in your TED Talk. You said that our lives are dictated by the things that we say yes to and the things that we say no to. And it's those yeses and nos that are boundaries. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I believe that all of us have a compass inside of us, and that we're born with this compass, and that your compass really says yes and no inside. And just as Susan is saying, other people are always asking you yes and no questions. They're always trying to get what it is that they need, and they're often pushing into your boundaries. I loved how you opened the show, Barbara, by talking about boundary predators. I call them boundary challenges, right? And that I expect people to be kind of pushing on my boundaries all day long or whenever I'm around human beings. And so I prepare for that and I think about that. And I think boundaries is an awareness practice where you're paying attention to what is your inner yes and no. And that part about other people being disappointed or other people being frustrated, how I meet that and how I coach people on how to meet that is to say straight up, hey, you might find this very disappointing, but I'm not able to do this right now, or I'm saying no to this. So I kind of call out the feeling that I'm most concerned about, and I just put it right on the table and I say, this might make you very angry. I'm saying no. So then I've kind of brought the feeling into the room and I'm not waiting for them to have it, but I'm also not going to take care of somebody else's feelings. And I'm a psychotherapist, so feelings is my job. And if everybody walks away with one message this morning, it is let people take care of their own feelings. You don't have to do that when you're clarifying a boundary.
So by acknowledging, by acknowledging and anticipating their reactions, you're kind of taking the wind out of their sails. You're sort of taking away their argument or their reaction, which is an interesting strategy. But your point about not being so concerned about people's feelings kind of goes against what a lot of us, particularly women, have been raised to believe. I mean, most of us are raised to be people pleasers. We're raised to be peacemakers. Is that why standing up for ourselves feels so uncomfortable?
I like to think of it as clarifying your boundaries. And we're all raised within cultures in our family, cultures around us in the community. And culture has a huge influence on what we think is okay to say yes to and what we think isn't okay. And I'm not saying ignore other people's feelings, nor am I saying that you have to guess what other people are feeling. I'm saying talk about your own feeling. If I think I'm disappointing people, then I'll say that. If I think this would make others angry at me, so I'm calling out the feelings that I'm concerned about. And I'll listen to somebody's feelings and validate their feelings. I can hear that that's hard for you. I understand that you really wanted this and I'm saying no, and I'm sorry that that's going to be challenging. So I'll validate a feeling, but I'm not going to go fix it, because we run around trying to respond to what everybody else needs based on how you were raised and what you think you're supposed to say yes to. But if you tune in inside, you might be hearing, this is a no for me. And if you keep ignoring it, you're going to get symptoms. And those symptoms are going to be headaches, stomach aches, making yourself sick. You might feel very anxious. You might feel depressed. Anxiety and depression can come from a lot of different places, but it also comes from not being true to your own yes and no. And so, sometimes we tune in like a radio to what everybody else wants, but are you tuning into yourself? And when we tune into ourselves, there is a wise guidance system inside every single person, and you are born with that. And when you listen to that, I call that wisdom.
Very wise words, and it's so true. We all come equipped with that sense of intuition, but I feel like over time that sense of intuition becomes dulled because we learn to ignore it for the sake of listening to everybody else around us. I want to shift the conversation over to Susan. You're quite open about being in a non-monogamous marriage, and that's something that takes quite an advanced level of boundary setting and trust and communication, probably a level most of us can only aspire to achieve. Take us through your journey, and how did you react when your husband first told you that he wanted to sleep with other women?
So it was actually a year into a relationship where my partner was my boyfriend by that time. Suggested that we open our relationship. I remember very well. It was during summertime, and we are having ice cream, enjoying the nature, walking. So everything was great. I was feeling so high, like, and it's so excited. And I say it's high not on anything, but just with love, and everything was going great. And I know that he was happy. So this conversation did not come from a place that he was not happy with our relationship. So and then he says, hey, you know what? I have a track record of every few years. I will start desiring other people, and it will end up with affair. It will end up with breakup. It will end up with so much headache. And he says, I really care about our relationship, and I wanted to do it right. We talk about this. I don't want to go behind your back. I don't want to surprise you. And when he was talking about this, a thought came back because I have helped clients who are non-monogamous, so I knew what he was talking about. But on the other side, and he didn't even know about polyamorous. He was just saying, "Hey, this is my track record. I really care about you, and I don't want to have an affair behind your back." So it was a shock for me because I was a monogamous person. I have treated or helped other clients who are struggling with polyamorous and jealousy and all that stuff. So I knew what it was, but I didn't think that for myself. So it was very difficult in the beginning. And for the next few years, it took a lot of working with my emotion, a lot of regulating, a lot of personal growth. And here we are. And now I'm saying that even if he was to change his mind and not become a non-monogamous, that I'll continue with the lifestyle because I've grown so much and I've come to love it for myself.
It's very interesting, and it leads me to ask the question of, when do you know to stand firm with your boundary, and when do you know that it could be open to negotiation? Because at first it was quite a shock to you, wasn't it, Susan? And even though you came from a culture where polygamy had been practiced in your family, you initially were quite against doing that for yourself.
I was, and actually that also contributed to my hesitation of multiple partner because of my culture. I really didn't want to be in a multiple relationship, which polygamy is a thing in where I come from Kenya. And because of that, I grew up saying, okay, I want to marry where it's a monogamous relationship, only to follow me. It's like if I need a lesson, which I did, always follow us. And part of me was abandonment issues. Like I knew for whatever reason, I was going to learn that lesson. Somehow the universe had to, I was going to learn that lesson. And non-monogamy was the perfect place to be able to learn that fear of abandonment to the point where I can detach myself from any abandonment, knowing that, and then personal growth comes to the point that even if no matter what, that I'll be okay. I think that's the personal growth, that no matter what, I'll be okay. Because when we're in that place, then we can love from a place of love and not from a place of fear. Then we can set the healthy boundaries because we're not afraid to be alone. We're not afraid to not be loved because we know we are lovable. So those are all the skills that I have come to learn, which makes me feel that I'm thriving in whatever relationship that I have. And that's the lesson that I would hope people would get.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Susan. We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, we'll hear more from Susan about lessons learned about boundary setting in an open marriage, as well as from Sari on how boundaries can actually give us more space in which to be vulnerable. We'll be right back after the break. Hi, welcome back to the new season of Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and on tonight's show, we're discussing how to set healthy boundaries. When our calendars are overflowing with obligations, it's important to commit to that one thing that can help us stay sane, and that's boundaries. And when someone asks you to do something you don't have the time or desire or inclination to do, yes, can often seem like the easiest answer, but it comes with a price, and that's usually hours, days, even months of feeling anger and resentment. I want to go back to the conversation that we had with Susan before we went to break, and that's about some of the feelings that you had to work through when your then boyfriend at the time, now husband, had asked you for an open relationship. What was the process that you used to work through some of those feelings and realizing that that boundary you thought you had was actually negotiable?
So what helped me was to realize that to solve any emotional roller coaster that I was feeling, that I had to turn inward. So that's mean that he was not the source of my happiness, and all the work that I needed had to be inward. So that's required. I started meditating. I started evaluating my thought pattern and questioning a thought pattern. Actually, you ask a very good question earlier on. Like most women, they are taught that to be people pleasing and not to want to offend other people if they set boundaries. So my work consisted of knowing that I have to learn to know that people have the right to their own emotions. So if someone is upset with me, can I stay with them without feeling guilty because they are feeling their emotions? They have the right to their emotion, and I can just allow them to feel that without having to feel guilty, or without taking the way sorry was saying, without taking those emotions to be on us. To I can respect how you're feeling, and I can work on myself. So that's what I started doing, knowing I can respect what my partner is saying, and that's not my place to carry, and I can work on myself. And myself, I knew I needed to work on abandonment issues, because that was the main reason why I couldn't set healthy boundaries, that I couldn't regulate my emotion, that caused me to feel insecure about who I was in the world, who I was in the relationship. And so the work began with us. And the biggest lesson that I learned was I am the creator of my own happiness. It's not my partner, and that I can be happy in any relationship. So with that, I knew then bring it on, like bring everything else, bring it on. I know I can walk inside, I can turn towards inside, and this personal growth is not dependent on anybody else but us.
I want to shift the conversation over to Sari. I'm curious, as a therapist, when clients come to you with help on setting or meeting or keeping healthy boundaries, do you often find that the issue is much bigger than the boundary itself, that it's more about things that may have happened back in childhood or the family of origin? And do you end up doing a lot of work that ends up going back in time?
Well, as a therapist, I do a lot of work with people that goes back, because we wonder, why are we using those particular coping skills? Because oftentimes the skills we used as children to cope with a situation, we continue to use as adults, and it doesn't work in adult situations for us. So that's one thing. But most people come to therapy because they are dealing with something inside where they have maybe violated their own sense of their own boundaries, their own yes and no's. And to me, in therapy, what I do is I tune in to what is your compass saying? What is your yes and no? And then I work out from there. So I'm not necessarily going back to childhood. I begin therapy on boundary work with self care. All boundary work begins on self care. So people may come into therapy and say, I'm struggling in this relationship, or I'm not saying what I need to say here, and I don't even know what I want. But I tune in, and their compass does know what they want. They're just maybe afraid to say it. As Susan was describing, there's all this inner work. When you are working with your boundaries, we begin with self care so that you can start to have that sense of connection with yourself, right? And Susan's story is a great story for all the listeners about how when you tune in inside, you know, it may be different than what you thought it was. It's not about negotiating your boundaries necessarily, but that your boundaries change. And you have to stay in touch with yourself. Agreements that you made 2 years ago may not be fulfilling you anymore. They may not be the way that you want to live. Maybe that dream job that you thought you always wanted. I always wanted to be a writer. And I finally saved up the money and took a year and a half off to be a writer and only be a writer. Oh my gosh, 2 weeks in, I was talking out loud to my dog. I was like, wait a minute, this is like the loneliest thing in the world. I'm a people person. I'm used to being with people all day long. I'm used to listening to their stories. And now I'm just rattling around the house by myself. I was like, no, this is not a fit. So I had to rethink that boundary, right? And so when you stay tuned in to yourself, you recognize that you might think something's a yes, but you don't have to stay with that if it doesn't work for you. And it's very important to go back to the things you brought up, resentment. It is very important to listen to your resentment and say, maybe I need to change what I'm doing.
What are some easy ways to create that space for yourself to allow yourself to have self-care? Like, for instance, I might turn my phone off if I just don't want to be disturbed, or I might have an out of office reply on my email if I want to take a few days off. What are some easy safeguards or some easy ways to start? Saying this is me time, or no, I don't want to hear from anyone right now, without feeling too guilty or anything like that in the process.
Well, you may feel guilty, but please do it anyway. That's the best way to deal with guilt is you may feel the guilt, but continue doing what you're doing. And in fact, I always say to people, separate your boundaries from your feelings. But let's get to that self-care time and how you protect it. So it really is first about what's fun for you. What do you like to do that you never get time to do that would be fun to you, that's accessible to you? And I want you to think of self-care as something that you do daily. And I want you to start with 20 minutes a day. So if you feel like you're on the bottom of your list and you're one of our viewers that is great at taking care of everybody else in your life, but you have really been neglecting self-care and you don't even know what it is and you don't have time for it, or you think you don't have time for it, I want you to start by finding 20 minutes a day. Research has shown that if you do something like that for 20 minutes, you reach a tipping point where you continue and you want more. And hopefully you'll build into an hour or longer. I do self-care all throughout the day, but I didn't start out that way. It is a journey and a process to build more and more self-care, because as you face challenges in your life, it is your self-care that supports you through those challenges. And that can be big boundary challenges. By the time people come to therapy with a boundary issue, it is an extremely difficult challenge that they're dealing with. It's like climbing the top of Mount Everest, and you get up there, and I'm sitting and listening to what people are dealing with, and it's like they're on Mount Everest in flip-flops and a bathing suit. I'm like, you are not prepared for these conditions. And I cannot begin to address with somebody that's facing that level of challenge boundary skills. I need to kind of get them to a place where we've got some self-care, and then we have some basic understanding of feelings, and then we get to relationships, and then we get to extreme challenges, and they become experts at being boundaries in their own life. I mean, that's my goal. I don't want to sit here and be the boundaries expert. I want you to be the boundaries expert. And you can do that. Anybody can do that. But we don't start with the hardest challenge and the biggest mess that you've gotten into because you now are stuck in a situation that maybe you were born into. Maybe you had no control over it. I was born on Mount Everest. I came into this world with a set of challenges that my family had that were kind of unbelievable. And I didn't create those issues. but I had to deal with them. And that's,
A lot of
so
a lot of
go ahead,
boundary
Barb.
setting is a lot of boundary setting really is about taking back control in your lives. We're just about to go back to break, but when we come back, we'll hear more on how to set, reset, manage, and keep those healthy boundaries in every aspect of your lives from experts Susan Wenzel and Sari Gilman. We'll be right back after the break. Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour. We're on the show talking about how to set healthy boundaries with special guests, Susan Wenzel and Sari Gilman. Now, I wanted to ask both of you as mental health professionals, as people who are in the field of compassion and taking care of other people, how do you take care of yourselves? And when did you know it was time to start doing more? I want to go back to you first, Susan.
So how I take care of myself throughout the day when I'm seeing client or in between my session, I make sure that I take time to stay grounded. That could be just breathing in exercises, just to be present, and that's mindfulness. Or sometimes if I have a little bit more time, I can take 5 minutes just to do meditation to stay grounded. Or I would do an exercise that I do with my client is close my eyes and I will try and listen to different sound or different noises. So if it's outside, I will look at the snow and just be present in that moment. That's how I take care of myself throughout the day. And of course, eating right is helpful, like whether you're snacking healthy stuff. So just keeping your body healthy. Another thing is being creative. This is a bigger picture that I like, especially when I'm having a busy workload. I like doing something as a self care that is creative. So it could be painting. I'll decide I'm going to paint a room, something that I completely has nothing to do with my work, completely that I can be focused. All I'm thinking is that painting, or what I'm thinking is that book. So anything that bring out your creativity and something that you can see the process and you can see the rewards that's going on. That's a self-care that I do. And of course, bubble bath helps once in a while.
I do love a good bubble bath. Now, Sari, again, going back to your wonderful TED Talk, you mentioned a very pivotal moment in a movie theater when you knew it was time to let go and start establishing boundaries, even doing the work that you love so much. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, I've experienced that several different times in my life is that, having really good self care is essential, especially if you care for other people. And if you're in healthcare, human services, or education, and the kind of work that I do, we're always around people and we're always caring and we're bringing our hearts to work. And when you do that kind of work, You also have to really take care of your own heart and understand when maybe you've had too much exposure to pain. So several years ago, when I was running a youth shelter, I realized I was sitting in this dark movie theater in the middle of the afternoon and I was crying. And it was like the place I was going to cry. It's dark saunas, dark movie theaters. And I realized I was carrying all these feelings of sadness from witnessing so many abused and homeless kids. And after 10 years of that work, it was like I had witnessed too much child abuse and I needed to take a break from that. And it was a very painful realization. I had a very similar thing happen last year during the pandemic. I wrote an article about it in Medium, which anybody can get. It's called Are You Vulnerable to Secondary Trauma? So I, recommend those of you who do this very heartful, caring work to really look at, is the work at times traumatizing you? So last year in the pandemic, I was working with people all around the world, from large organizations, community, grassroots organizations who were, considered essential workers, and trying to cope with their own fear and anxiety. And I would be working with several hundred people at a time online, and the exposure to people's pain, to their grief, to their loss, it became too much, too many people at a time, different than my one-on-one in practice, private practice, right? Suddenly there's hundreds of people and they're suffering. And so I said at the end of the year, this year I'm only going to work with one group a month online and limit my exposure to how much pain I am witnessing so I can do my own recovery. And about 6 months in now, I feel much better. My self-care routine is very intense. I do several hours in the morning before I sit down with clients of my own care. Most people don't have that luxury to have several hours, especially if you have small kids at home. There was no several hours. But I like everybody to have a strategy. And like what Susan was talking about, I wish you could see my table right now in front of me. It's filled with watercolor paints. I have books that I always read. And I say to like nurses who are in hospitals, like, get yourself a trashy novel. Go into the stairwell for 5 minutes, take a break and read a book. Like, give yourself just a mental rest from problem solving. That's really good self-care.
A trashy novel and a great bubble bath. I can't think of anything more heavenly right now. But Sarah, you bring up a good point in the role of COVID-19 exacerbating some of the things that we kind of took for granted were normal in the past, and now things have changed and will continue to change after restrictions are lifted. Going back to Susan, I'm curious what kinds of trends or patterns you've seen with your clients as boundaries have become more blurred with COVID-19, as work and taking care of the kids and personal lives all sort of meld into one and under one roof. What kinds of difficulties have you seen, your clients, or even in your family's case, in sort of keeping those boundaries?
I've noticed a lot of conflict, especially, or increase of conflict in a couples relationship. So maybe couples are tending to fight more because they know that separateness. I say healthy separateness. You're seeing someone every day. You're staying with someone. Now you're working in the same environment. Maybe you're not used to that before COVID, where you have that separation. That will go to work, and you go to work as well, and maybe you miss each other. But now you're constantly seeing each other, so that's causing conflict for my clients, and my clientele, especially for couple, have increased in that way. So boundary setting is also another thing. When you're working in the same environment, how do you set healthy boundaries? Hey, you can't just bunch in the room because I'm accessible, or you can't ask me to do something that you normally do because I'm right here. So that's also is increasing. And mental health as well, where remember we are creatures of social network and connection. And with the restriction, that have not been happening as much, which causing an increase of mental health for people, whether it's anxiety, depression, which I'm also seeing with my clients.
Mhm. I want to go back to you, Sari. I don't know if this has come up with your clients, but this whole concept of remote workplaces, working from home during the pandemic. What do you do, for instance, if your workplace uses instant messaging, such as Microsoft Teams, to get a hold of you, and your boss or your colleagues expect an immediate response, or else they assume that you're not working? How do you have that conversation with your boss that being pinged constantly is adding stress to your workday? Or how do you say no to a task at work without being perceived as someone who's not a team player? When the stakes are high like that, how do you go about having a diplomatic conversation, and is it possible to even do that without using the word no at all?
Yes to all of the above. Yes, you can do that. First of all, remember that a lot of these technologies come without boundaries. And we have been through the pandemic in a state of what I would say is complete boundary collapse. And so everybody's been having to rebuild, as Susan described, even in their relationships, places where they thought they had boundaries and now they didn't. And we've experienced that across all of our communities. All businesses are looking at this. But what's really important during a time of technologies being kind of thrown at you and expectations that you're constantly being pinged and interrupted, and we know disruption actually just has people end up creating a lot more errors in their work. It's really important for you to define where your boundary is with that. So when I work with teams or groups and they're using these kinds of messaging services, or people, or even with my clients who, if they have an emergency, how do they reach me? Am I on call 24/7? Are they would all my clients be calling me in the middle of the night? So I have to establish clarity of when people will hear back from me. And you can do that on your job as well. So if you're getting pinged all day, you might silence that and say, I'm going to respond to all this at 2 o'clock and at 5 o'clock. Or I respond first thing in the morning, see if anything really important came in, and you let your team know. I will check that first thing in the morning. I will respond to whatever on there. And then I'm going to check it in the afternoon at around 2 o'clock. And that's when you'll hear back from me. The most important thing for people that you work with is that they know they're going to hear back from you and that they know around when. So I'm always clear with people. If I get emails coming in, I can respond to you. I'll get back to you on Friday. So they know when they're going to hear back. I don't just receive it and then ignore it. I think that that's damaging to your work relationships and your personal relationships. But that doesn't mean that you have to be like umbilical cord on call to everyone all the time. That's just not possible. I say that to my clients too. I say I return calls up until 7 o'clock at night, Monday through Thursday. And then if something comes up over the weekend and you need to reach me, send me a message, but I'll get back to you on Monday morning. So they know when they're going to hear from me. Who else can you call during that time if you need someone?
It's probably the unpredictability of not being able to get a hold of someone that makes people more anxious than anything. But I want to ask you on the flip side, how can you make sure that you're honoring other people's boundaries? Like, what are some nonverbal cues you might look out for that you may be overstepping? And to what extent do you place the onus on your read other people's minds instead of them telling you what they need?
Well, I would say, first of all, ask. I have boundary conversations with people. I say, tell me about your boundaries. Tell me what's going to work for you. Is it okay if I respond to you at this hour, or what's best for you too, so that it's not all about me. And here's where my boundaries are, and here's what works for me. But I want to check in. I want to hear from you. What works for you? So I have an assistant that I've worked with since 2009. And I say to her, when do you need stuff from me by? And what's going to work for you? We're going to have a meeting. What day is best for you? These are the days that are good for me. We include people. If you're doing boundary work, do not expect that other people have the language. Do not expect that other people are going to put their boundaries on the table. I don't expect people to talk about their boundaries, but I will bring it up. And I will bring it up with anyone that I'm working with because I want to understand them so that we can have a great relationship.
Now, going back to Susan, once you start to figure out the parts of your life that could benefit from boundaries and you start taking steps towards implementing them, how can people go about doing so respectfully? Like, what are some words and phrases that they can use?
I like that saying that says communication is rubrication. I love that statement because communication is the first thing that you need to do. Communicating with whoever person you is in your life, and communicating with families, friends, communicating your needs, your want. That would be a very big thing. What is it that I want? What are my feelings? And what are your feelings? And what is it that you want? So we want to be able to communicate. We want to know our boundaries. Like if you're talking about in terms of non-monogamous relationship, ethical non-monogamous relationship is what time will you be coming home? What are you looking for? What are the boundaries? What are the safe sex? What are the communication? So we want to be able to communicate all that. So in boundaries, and we're talking boundaries, boundaries cannot take place or cannot be effective if we're not communicating them. So communication is hand in hand with them. Yeah.
And I know the saying no is a complete sentence, but for those of our viewers who may not be comfortable saying the word no, what are some good alternatives?
Okay. I would say really become familiar by saying no. Don't shy away. Yeah, it's true. There's alternative, but the way I like what Sari says, even if you're feeling guilty or even if you're nervous, say it anyway. So learn to be able to say no. It is important for your relationship because you don't want you are in charge of your life, and not saying no, it's like telling someone, hey, come and drive my car. Obviously you're going to drive the way I don't want you driving, and we're going to be having conflict. So I rather encourage people to be able to say no, but do it in a way that it's leave the other person's dignity intact. But there's this way of saying no to everything, no in the relationship, do whatever you want. No, boundaries that bring connection. No, that bring
Mhm.
connection. I can say no to you and you leave feeling so good about yourself. Or I can say no to you and you leave feeling like shit. And we don't want that. But on that language, we want you to feel closer when we say no.
And that's really the point of a skillfully well managed boundary, in that it creates intimacy and connection rather than putting up a wall between other people. We're just about to go to break, but when we come back, we'll hear more from our experts on the 7 patterns we all use and how you can grow your boundaries by dealing with those patterns. More from our experts after the break. Don't go away. Hi, welcome back to Ottawa Experts. I'm your host, Barbara Balfour, and we are talking about how to set and keep healthy boundaries with experts Susan Wenzel and Sari Gilman. Now, before we went to break, Sari, we mentioned a little bit about the 7 patterns and how we need to free ourselves from those patterns as we do that important boundary work. Talk us through what those patterns are.
The 7 patterns are ways that we have been raised in our culture to think that we have to behave. And they become ways that we don't clarify our boundaries or behaviors that you find yourself doing over and over. So the 7 patterns are workaholic, caretaker, sacrificer, protector, lover, number, and isolator. And what happens is we get trapped in these ways that our culture favors us to be. So for me, I was trapped in workaholism and caretaker. And you might find yourself using 3 or 4 of these patterns, or maybe even all 7. And in order to work with your boundaries, I believe that first we do self care. And then your self care has to match the patterns that you're getting stuck with. So, all the yoga classes in the world aren't going to help me recover from being a workaholic caretaker. I had to really work at my skills at setting boundaries with myself. And I believe this is where boundary work begins, not in our relationships to others, but in our relationship to ourselves. And how do we begin to recover from these patterns is you begin to set balance to them. So I might always have a tendency towards workaholism, but like I said earlier, this year in the pandemic, I set some boundaries around my work and said, "Oh, given the crises that we've been dealing with, I kind of, pushed myself back into workaholism and caretaking, and I was doing too much of that. And then I needed to set some boundaries on that this year. And so bringing balance to these patterns is a way that you work with your own inner boundaries. How do you deal with the fact if you're a number and maybe you're overspending or you're drinking or doing drugs or you have an addiction to gambling? What is it? Or maybe it's like Netflix 24/7. I mean, what is it that you're numbing out on? And if you're a number, how can you begin to feel and engage in life again, right? Maybe it's all those games that you're playing online and you're just like lost in Candy Crush or whatever. But it's a way to give yourself a break. But how else can you do that and begin to feel again? And so each of these patterns can end up sort of overrunning your boundaries because you lose sight of them because you're so busy people pleasing through workaholism or caretaking or sacrificing. And maybe you're also avoiding through isolating or numbing out. And in that part of isolating yourself, you become lonely and cut off. And so boundaries is about looking at what's happening to you with these patterns and where do you need to begin some of your own balance and recovery to those patterns. And that to me is what self-care is about. It's about matching your self-care to the pattern that maybe you're overusing.
So once you've identified those patterns, then maybe which ones of those you belong to, what are some mantras you could repeat to yourself or some phrases or language you could practice saying, maybe to yourself at first and then to others? Maybe some baby steps into those assertiveness training exercises when it comes to setting a boundary.
So with caretaking, that's a big one for me. So I have to remind myself that there are also other people that can support. So I say to myself, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only resource. And that's true with workaholism. That's true with caretaking. That's true with sacrificing. So the mantra that I use is, I am not the only resource. There are other resources around people, and I encourage people to build resources. Like, who else can you turn to? What else makes you happy? So building resources is the mantra that I tell myself, and building resources for myself as well. So reminding myself that, at the end of the day, how many resources am I offering to myself as well? And so resourcing, that's my word, that's my mantra. Does that help?
Absolutely. And, that brings parenting to mind. I know, Susan, we touched briefly on parenting when you and I chatted on the phone earlier. Talk to us about some of the boundaries that you've had to enforce as a parent. What were some of the more difficult boundaries, and how did you go about enforcing not just the boundaries, but also the consequences when those boundaries were not respected?
I would say and I have two children now; they are teenagers. But whenever I work with clients, and from my own story as well as a parent, I had to have a boundary with myself about becoming a perfect mom. So I had to let go of that. So my boundary was myself is, Susan, you don't need to be a perfect mom. You don't need to get it all. You don't need to be the source of happiness for for your children. The reason why I like that the mantra you're talking about, if I believe that I'm a source of happiness to my children, then it's very hard for me to set those boundaries to them, because they will start crying and I'll start thinking they're not happy. And then or if I have this belief of being the perfect mom, then I won't be able to set the healthy boundary. I won't be able to say, hey, I need a break right here. Can somebody else take care of you for a few hours? So, and also for child, if so, boundaries begin with us. I like what Sari said. Then we can extend that to our children. And one thing I had to learn with my children was, even if they are crying, they have the right to their own emotion. If someone says they're mad at me, I say you have the right to your own emotion. I don't have to carry it. I don't have to tell you, don't be mad, don't be upset. You have the right to your own emotion without me interfering with it. And that's what comes back. And we didn't touch on this, but it has really helped me, is to question, what belief do I have? When I see you mad and upset, when I see my child sad and upset because I said no to them, or somebody else I said no to them, what belief do I have that is causing me to feel guilty or shame? I have a belief that they should not cry. I question that thought. Is it true my children should not cry? Would I want them to go live without expressing those emotions? Or is it true that person should not should not be sad? Do I want to take that emotion away from them, or are they human? They'll feel sad. So anyway, what I'm trying to say is, question those beliefs that cause you to not set boundaries. How true are they? How do you react when you believe those thoughts? And how would it be if we stop believing those thoughts? So knowing our beliefs causes us, or stands in the way for being great parent. And I mean great parent, not perfect, just being human being and doing the best you can for your children. They cause us to not be great lovers, just being and doing the best you can. And they workforce and many places. So question those beliefs that stops you from setting those healthy boundaries, and see how true they are.
Wise words. Thank you so much, Susan. Unfortunately, we're almost at the end of our show. We just have a couple of minutes left. Where can our viewers find you and your resources?
So you can find me at susanwenzel.ca. Yeah, there we go. And I live in Winnipeg.
Okay, great. And you also have a book out. Can you tell us a little bit about your book?
Yes, so my book, actually I have been so lucky to, my book have been featured on Oprah magazine, New York Times, New York Post. So if you Google A Happy Life in an Open Relationship, A Guide to a Healthy and Fulfilling Non-Monogamous Love Life, you will find it. So men health and women health. So mainstream media have picked it up, and also local TV have been featuring my book. And because we do talk about boundaries, we do talk about evolving those boundaries as they evolve as well. And yeah, we talk about all that. And yeah,
thank you so much, Susan. We just have a minute left until the end of our show, and I just want to ask Sari, you've got a book club and a discussion group that you're setting up this spring, some boundary tips on your website, some other great resources. Where can people find those resources?
Yeah, it's at sarigilman.com. And you can also sign up and get free weekly boundary tips. I now have like 3 years worth of those that come every week in your email, and they're 2 sentences, and they just give you a great tip and a great reminder. And I have several books out, so you can learn more about those patterns, figure out where your recovery and boundary healing begins, and your self-care.
And I just want to mention, Sari, that your books are also widely used in some of the local universities in Ottawa. So I'm sure our local viewers will be familiar, and we'll also look out with great anticipation for your upcoming memoir, which we're all looking forward to. I want to thank you both so much, Susan and Sari, for joining us on the show this evening. I want to thank you for your tips on how to set and maintain healthy boundaries. And if you're joining us tonight, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you again, same time and place next week. Have a great evening.